What happens when a desperate child dials the wrong number? When 5-year-old Macy calls for help thinking she's reaching Daddy, she unknowingly contacts a stranger, CEO Christopher Ashford. This miraculous mistake leads to the rescue of 2 children, the reunion of lost lovers separated for 20 years, and proof that some wrong numbers are actually right. A story of courage, second chances, and unexpected heroes. If you liked this story, subscribe to the channel and type love in the comments. And don't forget to tell us where you're watching from. Great news awaits you. The rain hammered against the forest canopy like 1,000 angry fists, turning the peaceful afternoon into a nightmare. Little Macy Phillips clutched a massive leaf over her head, her 5-year-old hands trembling as she stood on a partially submerged wooden plank. Just 3 feet away, her 2-year-old brother Tommy floated in a wicker basket, his terrified wails barely audible over the roaring water that had risen impossibly fast around them. "Tommy, hold on!" Macy screamed, her voice cracking with panic. The river that had been a gentle stream an hour ago now churned with muddy fury, swallowing the safe spot where she'd left her baby brother to nap while she searched for berries. Her pink hoodie clung to her small frame, soaked through despite the leaf umbrella, and her bare feet struggled to maintain grip on the slippery wood. This forest had been their sanctuary for months, a place where nobody asked questions about 2 children wandering alone, but now it was trying to kill them. Macy's mind raced through her limited options. She couldn't swim well enough to reach Tommy's basket. She couldn't pull him to safety without falling in herself. And their mother wouldn't be home until late if she came home at all tonight. The man their mother lived with, the one Macy had been taught to call Daddy, certainly wouldn't care. He'd made it clear many times that they were burdens he tolerated only because of their mother. Then Macy remembered. The phone. The cheap flip phone their mother had given her months ago, only for emergencies. It was tucked in the inner pocket of her hoodie, probably ruined by the rain, but it was her only hope. With shaking hands, she pulled it out. Miraculously, the screen flickered to life. But who could she call? She didn't know her mother's number by heart. She didn't know anyone's number. Panic rising in her throat, Macy scrolled through the contact list with clumsy, wet fingers. There were only 5 numbers saved. The first one simply said, home. That had to be where her mother was, right? Where the man they called Daddy would answer. Without thinking further, Macy pressed the call button. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Tommy's cries grew weaker, and Macy's heart felt like it would explode. On the 4th ring, someone answered. "Daddy!" Macy sobbed into the phone, not waiting for a greeting. "Daddy, your son is in the river. Please, please help us." "We're in the forest by the big oak tree, and the water is everywhere, and Tommy's floating away, and I can't reach him, and—" Wait. A deep male voice interrupted, but it wasn't the voice she expected. This voice was different, smoother, concerned, completely unfamiliar. "Who is this? What's your name, sweetheart?" Macy's breath caught. This wasn't the gruff, impatient voice of her mother's partner, but she was too desperate to care about the confusion. "My name is Macy. Please, you have to help. My brother is 2 years old and he's in a basket in the water and I'm standing on a board and I'm scared and—" "Macy, I need you to breathe, okay? Need you to—" The voice on the other end had shifted into something commanding yet gentle. "I'm going to help you, but I need you to tell me exactly where you are. You said a forest with a big oak tree?" Through her sobs, Macy tried to explain. "It's the Riverside Forest Park, near the entrance with the stone bridge. There's a path that goes left and we always go to the clearing with the biggest oak tree. Please hurry, the water is getting higher." "I'm coming right now, Macy. Right now. Stay on the phone with me, okay? Don't hang up." On the other end of that call, 39-year-old Christopher Ashford stood frozen in his corner office on the 47th floor of Ashford Industries, staring out at the rain-soaked Seattle skyline. His hand gripped the phone so tightly his knuckles had turned white. A child was in danger. A little girl thought he was her father. "Jennifer!" He barked, and his assistant appeared instantly at his door. "Get Marcus on the phone. I need our tech team to trace this call immediately. And call emergency services. Send them to Riverside Forest Park. There are children trapped in rising water." Christopher was already moving toward the door, grabbing his coat and car keys. Jennifer's eyes widened. She'd worked for Christopher Ashford for 12 years and had never seen the normally composed CEO move with such frantic energy. "Sir, you have the Nakamura meeting in 15 minutes. Cancel everything. Cancel the rest of the day, hell, cancel the rest of the week if you need to. There's a 5-year-old girl standing in a river watching her baby brother drown, and she called me thinking I was her father." Christopher's gray-blue eyes blazed with an intensity that made Jennifer step back. "Get me that location trace now." He didn't wait for a response. Christopher ran, through the pristine corridors of Ashford Industries, past shocked employees who'd never seen their dignified CEO move faster than a measured walk. His Italian leather shoes pounded against the marble floors as he headed for the private elevator. "Macy, are you still there? Are you?" He spoke into the phone as he jabbed the elevator button repeatedly. "I'm here," came the small, terrified voice. Tommy stopped crying. Is that bad? Why did he stop crying? Christopher's heart clenched. "He might just be tired, sweetheart. Sometimes when people are scared, they get very quiet, but we're going to get to him very soon. I'm in my car now." The elevator doors opened and he burst into the underground parking garage. "Tell me what you can see around you." As Macy described her surroundings in halting, frightened words, Christopher's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Location confirmed, Riverside Forest Park, Northwest Section. Emergency services dispatched." At 12 minutes, heavy rain has flooded the area. 12 minutes might be too long. Christopher's Bentley roared to life. He'd always been a careful, law-abiding driver. Today he broke every speed limit in Seattle, his windshield wipers beating furiously against the deluge. The phone remained pressed to his ear, Macy's voice his only anchor to sanity. "I see lights." Macy suddenly cried out. "There are lights coming through the trees." "That might be the ambulance I sent, Macy, but I'm coming too. I'm only a few minutes away." Christopher took a corner too fast, his tires hydroplaning briefly before gripping the wet asphalt again. "You're doing so well, sweetheart. You're so brave." "I'm not brave," Macy whispered. "I'm scared." "Being scared and being brave aren't opposites," Christopher said, surprised by the emotion thickening his own voice. "Being brave means doing what you need to do even when you're terrified. And you did that. You found a way to call for help. You protected your brother. That's what brave looks like." Through the rain, Christopher could see the entrance to Riverside Forest Park. He'd never been here before, had never had reason to visit this particular park in all his years living in Seattle. His life was boardrooms and charity galas, not forest clearings and riverside paths. But as he abandoned his Bentley at the entrance and ran into the tree line, following the lights of the emergency vehicles ahead, he felt more purpose than he'd experienced in years. The paramedics had already reached the clearing. Christopher burst through the underbrush to see a surreal scene. A tiny girl in a soaked pink hoodie standing on a half-submerged plank, and a small basket bobbing in the swollen river with an even tinier child inside. 2 paramedics were already in the water, one securing the basket while the other reached for the girl. "Macy!" Christopher shouted. The little girl's head whipped around, her eyes, huge and blue and filled with tears, locked onto his. For a moment that stretched into eternity, they simply stared at each other. Then Macy did something that would haunt Christopher's dreams and warm his heart for the rest of his life. She smiled at him through her tears and whispered, "You came." Within minutes, both children were wrapped in emergency blankets on solid ground. Tommy was breathing normally, more asleep than unconscious, apparently exhausted from crying. Macy refused to let go of Christopher's hand. The paramedics checked both children thoroughly, while Christopher answered the questions of a police officer who'd arrived with the emergency crew. "And you are?" the officer asked, pen poised over his notepad. "Christopher Ashford. I received a call from this young lady asking for help." "You're the father?" "No, she dialed a wrong number." The officer's eyebrows rose. "A wrong number?" "She thought she was calling her father. Instead, she reached me." Christopher looked down at Macy, who was staring up at him with an expression of confusion and trust tangled together. "I'm very glad she did." "We need to contact the parents," the officer said. "The mother's name is..." He consulted his notes. "Victoria Phillips, lives at 847 Maple Street, apartment 2C. We've been trying to reach her, but there's no answer. Christopher felt Macy's hand tighten around his fingers. When he looked down, the little girl's face had gone pale. "Please don't call him," she whispered. "He gets so angry when we cause trouble." "Who, sweetheart?" "The man Mommy lives with. We call him Daddy, but he's not really our daddy. He says we're lucky he lets us stay there at all." Something cold and dark settled in Christopher's chest. He'd built a business empire worth billions. He'd negotiated with world leaders and faced down corporate raiders. But the casual acceptance in this 5-year-old's voice as she described her precarious living situation made him want to break something. The ambulance ride to Seattle General Hospital gave Christopher time to piece together more of Macy's story. She sat beside him in the back, still holding his hand, while Tommy slept peacefully on a stretcher being monitored by a paramedic. The little girl talked in fits and starts, sometimes answering Christopher's gentle questions, sometimes volunteering information as if she'd been waiting her whole short life for someone to actually listen. "Mommy works really hard," Macy explained, her voice small but steady now that the immediate danger had passed. "She cleans offices at night and works at a diner during the day. Sometimes she has to sleep at her friend Janet's house between her jobs because it's too far to come home. That's when she's gone for a whole day and night." "And who takes care of you when she's at Janet's house?" Christopher tried to keep the shock out of his voice. Macy shrugged, a gesture far too adult for her tiny shoulders. "I do. I know how to make sandwiches, and I can heat up soup on the stove if I'm really careful. And I know we're not supposed to bother Kevin, that's Mommy's boyfriend, because he needs his sleep for his important work." Christopher had to bite his tongue to keep from asking what important work could possibly excuse a grown man from ensuring 2 small children were safe and fed. Instead, he asked, "How did you and Tommy end up in the forest today?" "We go there a lot. It's nice and quiet and nobody yells at us there. Kevin doesn't like it when we make noise in the apartment. He says kids should be invisible." Macy traced patterns on the emergency blanket with one finger. "Today we were there because Mommy was doing a double shift, and Kevin said we had to leave because he couldn't think with us there. So we went to the forest. We do that sometimes. We were having a good time until the rain started." The casual way Macy described what amounted to neglect and verbal abuse made Christopher's blood boil. But he kept his voice gentle. "Macy, can I ask you something? The phone you used to call me, where did you get that number?" "Mommy gave me the phone a long time ago. She said it was for emergencies only. She saved some numbers in it and told me the first one was home if I ever needed to call Daddy." Macy's brow furrowed in confusion. "But you're not Kevin. Why did you answer Kevin's phone?" Before Christopher could attempt to answer that question, because he had no answer, they arrived at the hospital. The next 2 hours were a blur of examinations, paperwork, and Christopher making increasingly insistent calls to Victoria Phillips's phone that went straight to voicemail. The police officer who'd been at the scene arrived at the hospital with an update that made Christopher's jaw clench. Victoria Phillips' phone records showed the home number in Macy's phone wasn't registered to Kevin or anyone at the Maple Street address. It was an old, disconnected number that had since been recycled and assigned to Christopher Ashford's private line, a number known only to his closest business associates and family members. "It's possible," the officer explained, "that the number was saved in that phone years ago before it was given to the child. Or it could simply be a wrong number that was programmed in by mistake. Whatever the reason, Christopher thought, it had brought him to that forest. It had brought him to Macy and Tommy. And now, sitting in a hospital waiting room with 2 frightened children who had no one else, he couldn't bring himself to simply walk away and leave them to the system. "Sir," a nurse approached, her expression sympathetic. "We've cleaned both children up and they're medically cleared. The little boy is healthy but exhausted. We've got him sleeping in a bed in the pediatric ward. The girl is physically fine as well, though clearly traumatized. The social worker is on her way, but..." She glanced at Macy, who had fallen asleep with her head on Christopher's shoulder. "She seems very attached to you." "I know." Christopher carefully shifted so Macy could rest more comfortably. "Has there been any word from the mother?" "Not yet. Sir, I don't mean to pry, but are you family?" The question hung in the air. Christopher looked down at the sleeping child nestled against him. her damp blonde hair leaving wet patches on his $3,000 suit. He thought about the phone call that should never have reached him. He thought about how Macy had smiled at him through her tears and said, "You came." He thought about how, in all his 39 years, he'd never felt as needed as he had in those desperate minutes racing to save two children who weren't his. "No," he said finally. "I'm not family, but I'm not leaving until I know they're safe." The nurse smiled. "I'll bring you some coffee then. Something tells me it's going to be a long night." She was right. It was nearly midnight when Victoria Phillips finally burst through the hospital doors, her dark blonde hair disheveled and her mascara smeared from tears. She was 39 years old but looked older, worn down by years of struggle that showed in the lines around her eyes and the defeated slope of her shoulders. A tall, heavy-set man with a perpetual scowl followed behind her. Kevin, Christopher presumed. "Where are my babies?" Victoria's voice cracked as she rushed to the nurse's station. "Someone called me an hour ago and said my children were in the hospital and I came as fast as I could and—" She stopped dead in her tracks as Christopher stood up from his chair, Macy still sleeping against his shoulder. For a long, suspended moment, Victoria Phillips stared at him as if seeing a ghost. All the color drained from her face. Her hand flew to her mouth, and Christopher, who had been preparing a speech about child welfare and proper supervision, found himself equally frozen. Because he knew this woman, not from a brief encounter or a professional meeting. He knew the exact shade of her eyes, hazel with flecks of gold that caught the light. He knew the small scar above her left eyebrow from when she'd fallen off her bike at 14. He knew the way she bit her lower lip when she was nervous, exactly like she was doing right now. "Vicky?" The name fell from Christopher's lips as if no time had passed at all, as if it hadn't been 20 years since he'd last spoken it. "Chris?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Christopher Ashford? What? How, why are you? You two know each other?" Kevin's aggressive voice cut through the moment. He stepped forward, placing a possessive hand on Victoria's shoulder. "Vicky, who is this guy?" But Victoria didn't answer. She was staring at Christopher with an expression of such complex emotion, shock, recognition, longing, fear, disbelief, that Christopher felt the world tilt beneath his feet. This was impossible. The woman he'd loved more than life itself at 19, the woman who'd disappeared from his life without explanation 20 years ago, was standing in front of him. And she was the mother of the two children he'd just saved. The mother whose home number had somehow impossibly connected to his private line. "Mommy?" Macy stirred awake, blinking up at the commotion. When she saw her mother, her face lit up. "Mommy, this is the man who saved us. He came when I called Daddy's phone, but he answered instead, and he ran so fast and—" "What?" Kevin's face darkened. "You called where? Give me that phone right now." He lunged forward, reaching for Macy with anger flashing in his eyes, but Christopher stepped smoothly between them. His 6'2" frame and commanding presence stopped Kevin in his tracks. "I don't think so," Christopher said quietly, but there was steel beneath the silk in his voice. The child was terrified and drowning. She called for help. Perhaps we should focus on being grateful she's alive rather than getting angry about phone calls. "And who the hell are you to tell me what to do?" Kevin's face was reddening. "These aren't your kids. Vicky, get Macy away from this guy, now." Victoria seemed to shake herself out of her trance. She moved forward, reaching for her daughter, but her eyes never left Christopher's face. "Macy, honey, come here." Macy hesitated, looking up at Christopher with worry. "But he's nice, Mommy. He promised he'd make sure we were safe." "I know, baby, I know." Victoria's voice broke as she took Macy into her arms. The little girl immediately started crying again, this time from relief at seeing her mother. Over Macy's head, Victoria mouthed to Christopher, "Thank you." The hospital social worker arrived then, a brisk woman named Mrs. Patterson, who'd clearly dealt with situations like this before. She ushered them all into a private consultation room, Christopher included despite Kevin's objections. Tommy was brought in, still sleepy but unharmed, and Victoria clutched both her children to her chest as if she'd never let them go again. "Ms. Phillips, Mrs. Patterson began, her tone professional but not unkind. I need to understand how two small children ended up unsupervised in a forest during a flash flood. I was at work, Victoria said immediately. I was doing back-to-back shifts and staying at my friend's house between them because the commute is too long. Kevin was supposed to watch them today, but Kevin was busy, Kevin interrupted sharply. I told them to go outside and play. How was I supposed to know there'd be a damn flood? You sent a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old to play unsupervised for hours? Mrs. Patterson's pen scratched against her notepad. Mr. Barnes, Kevin Barnes. And I'm not their father, so I'm not responsible for every little thing. That's their mother's job. The way Kevin said it made Christopher's hands curl into fists. Victoria's face had gone pale again, and she was holding her children so tightly that Macy squirmed a bit. Christopher watched the dynamics playing out before him, and felt pieces clicking into place. The exhausted mother working herself to death, the resentful boyfriend who saw children as burdens, the little girl who'd learned to take care of herself and her baby brother because no one else would. Ms. Phillips, Mrs. Patterson continued, I'm going to need to file a report about this incident. The conditions that led to today's near tragedy suggest that we may need to do a home welfare check. No! Victoria's outburst startled everyone. Please, no. I know how this looks, I know it's not perfect, but my kids are everything to me. I work hard to give them everything I can. Today was unusual, it won't happen again, I promise it won't happen again. Christopher wanted to ask, what about yesterday? What about last week? What about all the other times these children were left alone or sent away because they were inconvenient? But he bit his tongue. This wasn't his business, these weren't his children. He'd done what he'd set out to do, saved 2 lives. The rest should have nothing to do with him. Should have. But then Macy looked up from her mother's embrace and her eyes found Christopher's. And in that moment he saw something that would haunt him far longer than he expected. Hope. This tiny girl who'd been disappointed by every adult in her life except possibly her overwhelmed mother, was looking at him with desperate, foolish hope. As if he might be different. As if he might stay. Mommy, Macy whispered. Can the nice man come home with us? I don't want to go home if Kevin is mad. The room went silent. Kevin's face turned an alarming shade of red. Victoria looked torn between horror and something that might have been longing as she stared at Christopher. Mrs. Patterson's eyebrows climbed toward her hairline. And Christopher. Christopher made a decision that would change everything. Macy, I can't come home with you tonight, he said gently, moving closer to kneel down beside the little girl. But I'm going to give your mommy my phone number, okay? And if you ever need anything, if you're ever scared or hungry or just need someone to talk to, you can call me, anytime, day or night. Can you remember that? Macy nodded, her eyes wide and serious. Anytime? Anytime. Now hold on just a... Kevin started, but Victoria cut him off. Thank you, she said to Christopher, and there were tears streaming down her face now. Thank you so much for saving my babies. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't. She couldn't finish. Christopher stood and pulled a business card from his wallet, one of his personal cards with his private number, the same number that had received Macy's call. He handed it to Victoria, and when their fingers touched during the exchange, he felt a jolt of recognition that went bone deep. This woman had been his entire world once. And now she was standing before him, worn down and struggling and tied to a man who clearly made her life harder rather than easier. 20 years ago, they'd had plans. They were going to change the world together. What had happened? But there was no time for those questions now. Kevin was practically dragging Victoria toward the door, muttering angrily about making a scene and embarrassing him in public. Victoria clutched her children and Christopher's card as if both were lifelines. At the doorway, she turned back one last time. Chris, she said softly, and just hearing her say his name after all these years made his chest ache. I never forgot you. Then they were gone, and Christopher was left standing in the hospital consultation room with Mrs. Patterson, who was studying him with open curiosity. That was quite something, Mr. Ashford, she said mildly. Do you make it a habit of giving your personal number to families in crisis? No, Christopher admitted. This is definitely a first. Something tells me it won't be the last time you hear from them. Mrs. Patterson gathered her papers. For what it's worth, I've seen a lot of child welfare cases. That little girl trusts you. That's rare. Children usually know who's safe and who isn't. Don't take it lightly. Christopher had no intention of taking it lightly. As he finally left the hospital and walked out into the rain-washed night, his mind was spinning with questions and memories and the image of Victoria Phillips's face when she'd first seen him. The shock. The recognition. And beneath it all, something that had looked very much like pain. He sat in his Bentley for a long time, staring at nothing, before finally pulling out his phone. He'd canceled all his meetings today without a second thought. He'd abandoned a crucial negotiation to race through a thunderstorm. He'd held a frightened child and promised her safety without considering the implications. And now he couldn't stop thinking about the woman she'd called Mommy. The woman who'd been the love of his life before she vanished without explanation. The woman who was now living in a tiny apartment with an angry man and working herself to death to provide for 2 small children. Christopher pulled up his contacts and scrolled to a name. Marcus Green, his head of security, and, more importantly, his oldest friend. Marcus, Christopher said when the call connected. I need you to do something for me. Quietly and discreetly. It's 1 a.m, Chris. Whatever it is can probably wait until... It can't wait. I need you to find out everything you can about a woman named Victoria Phillips and a man named Kevin Barnes. Current address 847 Maple Street, apartment 2C. Employment records, financial status, any legal issues, everything. There was a pause. Chris, what's going on? Christopher closed his eyes and saw Macy's trusting face, saw Tommy's tiny form in that basket, saw Victoria's tears and the way her hands had trembled when she'd taken his card. I don't know yet, he said honestly, but I need to understand what's happening here. And Marcus? Remember Victoria Summers? From college? Another pause, longer this time. You're Victoria, the one who disappeared senior year? She didn't disappear, Christopher said quietly. She's been here in Seattle the whole time. She's Victoria Phillips now, and those children I saved today? They're hers. Marcus let out a low whistle. Jesus, Chris. What are the odds? That's what I need you to help me figure out, because something isn't right about any of this. That phone call shouldn't have reached me. Victoria shouldn't be working 2 jobs and barely surviving while that boyfriend of hers does nothing. And those kids. His voice grew tight. Those kids deserve better than what they're getting. I'll start first thing in the morning, Marcus promised. Chris, be careful. I remember how destroyed you were when she left. Don't let old feelings cloud your judgment here. But as Christopher finally drove home to his penthouse downtown, he suspected it was already too late for that warning. His feelings weren't clouded. They were crystal clear. Something had brought Macy's call to his phone instead of Kevin Barnes's phone. Something had put him in that hospital room to see Victoria after 20 years of silence. And Christopher had built an empire by trusting his instincts when they told him to pay attention to the seemingly impossible coincidences that most people overlooked. This was no coincidence. This was fate giving him a second chance. Not just with Victoria, though his heart had started beating differently the moment he'd recognized her, but with those 2 innocent children who'd done nothing to deserve the precarious life they'd been born into. Macy had called him Daddy by mistake. But maybe, Christopher thought as he finally fell into bed as dawn broke over Seattle, maybe it hadn't been a mistake at all. The Monday morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Christopher's office, but he barely noticed. He'd been awake since 5, his mind refusing to let him rest. Everything from Saturday felt like a fever dream. The desperate phone call, the race through the rain, saving the children, and then that moment when Victoria had turned and seen him. The way all the air had left the room. The way 20 years had collapsed into nothing. You look terrible, Marcus observed, walking into the office without knocking as he'd done for the past 15 years of their friendship. He carried a thick folder and 2 cups of coffee. When's the last time you actually slept? Irrelevant. Christopher took one of the coffees gratefully. What did you find? Marcus settled into the chair across from Christopher's desk and opened the folder. His expression was grim. You're not going to like this. Victoria Phillips. formerly Victoria Summers, born in Portland, Oregon. Moved to Seattle for college at 19. I know all that, Christopher interrupted. I need to know what happened after. Right. After you two? Marcus paused delicately. After she left, Victoria apparently dropped out of University of Washington 3 months before graduation. There's a gap in her records for about 3 months. Then she resurfaces working as a waitress in Tacoma. She had Macy when she was 34. 5 years ago, Christopher calculated quickly. What about the father? No father listed on the birth certificate, then Tommy came along 3 years after that. Also no father listed. She met Kevin Barnes about 18 months ago. He moved into her apartment 6 months later. Marcus flipped through his notes. Kevin's record is concerning. 3 arrests for assault, 2 bar fights, and 1 domestic disturbance with a previous girlfriend, though charges were dropped. He claims to work in sales, but has spotty employment records. Meanwhile, Victoria works as a night janitor for a cleaning company and waitresses at Rosie's Diner downtown. She's been pulling double shifts regularly for the past year, sometimes sleeping at a co-worker's apartment between shifts to avoid the long commute. Christopher's jaw tightened. And Barnes? What does he do all day while she works herself to death? From what I could piece together, not much. He plays poker at an underground club 3 nights a week, has significant gambling debts, owes about $40,000 to various bookies and loan sharks. He's behind on his truck payments, and here's the interesting part. Marcus pulled out a specific document. He's been receiving what appears to be hush money. Monthly deposits of $2,000 from an account registered to someone named James Whitmore. Who's James Whitmore? That's where it gets complicated. James Whitmore is the CEO of Whitmore Property Development. They're the company that bought out the apartment complex where Victoria lives last year. But the connection goes deeper. James Whitmore was also on the board of directors at University of Washington 20 years ago, when you and Victoria were students there. Christopher felt something cold settle in his stomach. Pull up everything you can find on James Whitmore. And Marcus? Find out why Kevin Barnes is receiving regular payments from him. Already working on it. Marcus hesitated. Chris, there's something else. I did some digging into Victoria's financial records. Nothing illegal. Just public information. She's drowning in debt. Medical bills mostly from when Tommy was born premature. She's been making minimum payments on everything for years. If Barnes is supposed to be helping with expenses, he's not. In fact, based on her account activity, it looks like she's been giving him money regularly. Jesus. Christopher stood and walked to the window, staring out at the Seattle skyline without really seeing it. So let me get this straight. Victoria is working 2 jobs to support herself and 2 children while Barnes contributes nothing, gambles away whatever money he does have, and receives mysterious payments from a real estate mogul who has some connection to Victoria's past. Does that about sum it up? That's the gist of it, yes. Christopher's mind was already 10 steps ahead, analyzing possibilities and connections. James Whitmore. He knew that name from somewhere beyond Marcus's recent revelation. A memory tugged at him, something from college, something important. Marcus, 20 years ago, right before Victoria disappeared. Do you remember the scholarship controversy? Marcus's eyes widened. The one where several students lost their funding? Victoria was one of them, wasn't she? She was. She'd had a full ride, and then suddenly in our senior year, the scholarship foundation said there'd been some kind of administrative error and her funding was revoked. She was devastated. She couldn't afford tuition without it. Christopher turned from the window, his eyes sharp. Who was in charge of that scholarship foundation? I'd have to check, but it was the Whitmore Family Foundation. Christopher finished. James Whitmore's father ran it, but James was on the board even then. He was the one who personally delivered the news to Victoria. I remember because she came to my apartment that night in tears. And 2 weeks later she was gone, Marcus said slowly. Chris, are you thinking what I'm thinking? I'm thinking there's a connection we're missing, and I'm thinking that whatever it is, Kevin Barnes is part of it. Christopher's hand curled into a fist against the window. I need to talk to Victoria, alone. That might be harder than you think. From what I observed, Barnes doesn't let her out of his sight much. Then we'll have to create an opportunity. Christopher pulled out his phone and looked at the business card he'd given Victoria, now photographed and saved in his contacts. She has my number. I told Macy she could call anytime. Let's see if Victoria took that invitation seriously. He composed a text message, simple and direct. Victoria, it's Christopher. I wanted to check on Macy and Tommy. How are they doing? If you need anything, please don't hesitate to reach out. The response came faster than he expected. They're okay. Nightmares, but okay. Thank you again for everything. Christopher stared at the words, then typed, I'd like to see them if that's all right. Make sure they're really okay. Maybe lunch sometime this week? 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally. I'd like that, but it's complicated. Because of Barnes? A longer pause. Yes. Christopher made a decision. What time do you get off your morning shift at the diner? 2 p.m. most days. I'll be there at 2 tomorrow just to talk, Victoria. That's all. You don't owe me anything, but I think we need to discuss what happened Saturday. And maybe some other things that have been left unsaid for 20 years. This time the pause was so long that Christopher thought she wouldn't respond. Then, okay. Tomorrow at 2. But Chris, please don't make this harder than it already is. Christopher didn't know how to respond to that, so he simply sent, see you tomorrow. Marcus was watching him with concern. You're diving into deep waters here, my friend. Those children were alone in a forest during a flash flood because nobody was watching them, Christopher said flatly. Macy is 5 years old and she knows how to cook for herself and her baby brother because she has to. Tommy is 2 and his mother can barely afford to feed him. Deep waters? Maybe. But I've spent 20 years wondering what happened to the woman I loved, and now I find out she's been here in Seattle the whole time, struggling and suffering while I built an empire 30 blocks away. So yes, Marcus, I'm diving into deep waters, and I'm not coming up until I understand what the hell happened. The next day, Christopher found himself doing something he hadn't done in years, waiting nervously. He'd arrived at Rosie's diner at 1:45 p.m., and ordered coffee he didn't drink. The diner was a small, worn establishment in a transitional neighborhood, the kind of place where the vinyl booths had been patched too many times, and the laminate tables had seen better decades. But it was clean, and the few customers seemed content, and when Victoria appeared from the kitchen at exactly 2:03 p.m., Christopher understood why. She moved through the space with practiced efficiency, checking on her tables one last time, refilling coffee cups without being asked, delivering change with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She was wearing the diner's uniform, a simple blue dress with a white apron, and her hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail. Without makeup and in the harsh fluorescent lighting, Christopher could see the toll that years of struggle had taken, but he could also see the girl he'd fallen in love with at 19, still there beneath the exhaustion. When Victoria finally slid into the booth across from him, she looked like she might bolt at any moment. Hi, she said softly. Hi. Christopher found himself at a loss for words, which rarely happened. Thank you for meeting me. I almost didn't come. Victoria's hands twisted together on the table. I actually walked past the window twice before I finally came in. Why did you come in, I mean? And Victoria was quiet for a moment, staring at her hands. Because I owe you an explanation, and because... She looked up, and her hazel eyes were bright with unshed tears. Because when Macy described the man who saved them, even before I saw you, I knew. I knew it was you. Don't ask me how, I just knew. The phone number, Christopher said. Marcus traced it. The home number in Macy's phone. It's been disconnected for years, but when it was recycled by the phone company, it was assigned to me. To my private line. That's impossible. That's what I thought too. But here we are. A waitress came by to take their order. Victoria asked for just water. Christopher ordered 2 club sandwiches and fries, remembering that Victoria never ate enough when she was stressed. She opened her mouth to protest, but he held up a hand. You're eating, Vicky. Don't argue. The old nickname made her flinch. Nobody's called me that in 20 years. Nobody's had the right to. I did once. Chris, why did you disappear? The question burst out of him before he could stop it. We were supposed to meet at the library that Wednesday night to study for finals. You never showed. I called. I went to your apartment. Your roommate said you'd packed up and left. No note, no explanation, nothing. I spent 6 months looking for you, Vicky. I hired investigators. I called your parents in Portland and they said you'd told them not to give me any information. So I need to know, why? What did I do that was so terrible you couldn't even say goodbye? Victoria's composure crumbled. Tears spilled down her cheeks and she covered her face with her hands. You didn't do anything, she choked out. God, Chris, you were perfect. You were everything. That's why I had to leave. That doesn't make any sense. It does if you know the whole story. Victoria pulled a napkin from the dispenser and wiped her eyes, though the tears kept coming. You remember when I lost my scholarship? What I told you about it being an administrative error? Of course. It wasn't an error. It was deliberate. James Whitmore called me into his office and told me my scholarship was being revoked unless I did something for him. Christopher's blood ran cold. What did he want? He wanted me to leave you. Victoria's voice dropped to barely a whisper. He said his daughter, Caroline, was in love with you. Said you were from the right family, the right background, that you'd go far and Caroline deserved someone like you. He knew we were together. Everybody knew. But he said it was just a college romance and it would end eventually anyway. He offered to let me keep my scholarship if I broke up with you and left Seattle. If I didn't. She paused, struggling for composure. He said he'd make sure I never graduated from any university. He had that kind of power, Chris. He was on the board of directors. He could have done it. Jesus Christ, Christopher felt like he'd been punched. Vicky, why didn't you tell me? I would have fought him. My family had lawyers, connections. I know you would have fought. That's exactly why I couldn't tell you. Victoria met his eyes, and the pain in her gaze was raw and old and deep. You were 3 months from graduating with job offers from every major tech company in Seattle. You had your whole future ahead of you. If you'd fought Whitmore, he would have destroyed you too. He said as much. So I made a choice. You sacrificed yourself. I sacrificed us, Victoria corrected quietly. I thought I was doing the noble thing, that I was protecting you. I left Seattle, moved to Tacoma, planned to finish my degree there. But by then I was so depressed I couldn't function. I dropped out, started working minimum wage jobs. And I told myself that at least you were okay, that you'd move on, marry someone from your world, build the empire I always knew you'd build. I didn't marry Caroline Whitmore, Christopher said sharply. I didn't marry anyone because I never got over you. Victoria's sob was audible. I'm sorry. God, Chris, I'm so sorry. I thought I was doing the right thing. The waitress returned with their food, sensing the tension and setting the plates down quickly before retreating. Neither of them touched the sandwiches. Christopher reached across the table and took Victoria's hand, the first time he'd really touched her since she'd walked back into his life. What about Macy and Tommy? He asked gently. Their fathers? There were no fathers, not really. Victoria stared at their joined hands. After you, I dated a little. Nothing serious. Macy's father was a guy I saw for a few months. When I got pregnant, he wanted nothing to do with it. Tommy's father was similar. I know how that sounds, like I was careless or stupid. But the truth is, I was lonely. I wanted a family of my own because I'd lost the only one I'd ever really wanted. And Kevin Barnes? Victoria's hand tensed in his. Kevin is a mistake I don't know how to fix. Does he hurt you? Christopher's voice was dangerous. Not physically, but he's mean when he drinks, and he's always drinking. He's in debt to some bad people, Chris, really bad people. He says he's working on paying them back, but I don't know how. He's unemployed most of the time. I give him money I don't have because I'm scared what they'll do to him if he doesn't pay. And I know that sounds insane, but it sounds like you're trying to survive, Christopher interrupted. Vicky, listen to me. Those payments Barnes is receiving? Marcus traced them. They're coming from James Whitmore. Victoria's face went white. What? $2,000 a month like clockwork. Has been for 18 months, exactly when Barnes moved in with you. Christopher leaned forward. I think Whitmore has been paying Barnes to keep you under control. To keep you isolated and struggling so you'd never be in a position to reconnect with me or expose what he did 20 years ago. But why would he care after all this time? You didn't marry his daughter. His plan didn't even work. Didn't it? Think about it, Vicky. You disappeared from my life and I spent years trying to find you. Do you know what kind of mistakes a heartbroken 22-year-old with a trust fund can make? I almost tanked my first business venture because I couldn't focus. I pushed away every relationship because they weren't you. Whitmore didn't need me to marry Caroline, he just needed to break us apart. And it worked. Victoria pulled her hand back, covering her mouth. Oh God, this is all my fault. No, this is all Whitmore's fault, and Barnes's fault, and possibly mine for not being smarter 20 years ago. Christopher's mind was racing, fitting pieces together. The apartment complex where you live, Whitmore bought it last year, right? Yes. The rent went up. I could barely afford it before, and now. Victoria trailed off. He's keeping you trapped. Can't afford to move. Can't afford to leave Barnes because you need his help with expenses, even though the help he's providing is money that Whitmore is paying him to stay in your life. It's brilliant in a sick way. What do I do? Victoria's voice was small and lost. I have 2 children, Chris. I can't just uproot them. And Barnes. He says he'll fight me for custody if I try to leave. He says he has rights because he's lived with us for 6 months. He has no rights to children that aren't his, Christopher said firmly. And you're not going to do this alone. Not anymore. Chris, I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering. Those children saved themselves from drowning by calling me Vicky. Macy trusted me enough to dial my number thinking I was her father. That means something. And you. He reached across the table again, taking both her hands this time. You were the love of my life. You still are, if I'm being honest. Maybe that makes me crazy after 20 years, but there it is. I'm not walking away from you again. From any of you. Victoria was crying in earnest now, and Christopher wanted to slide into the booth next to her and hold her the way he used to when they were young and the world seemed simpler. But they weren't those people anymore. 20 years and 2 children and countless struggles stood between them. The path forward wouldn't be simple, but it would be worth it. What do you need? Christopher asked. Right now, today, what do you need most? Victoria thought about it. Safety, a place where Macy doesn't have to be afraid, where Tommy can be loud without someone yelling at him to shut up, where I can sleep for more than 4 hours without worrying about which bill I won't be able to pay this month. Then that's what you'll have. Christopher pulled out his phone. I own several properties in Seattle. There's a townhouse in Fremont, 3 bedrooms, quiet neighborhood, good schools nearby. It's been sitting empty for 6 months. You and the kids can move in immediately. Chris, I can't afford. You won't be paying. Consider it. Compensation for 20 years of suffering that never should have happened. That's insane. No, what's insane is you working 2 jobs while Barnes gambles away Whitmore's hush money. What's insane is Macy learning to cook at 5 years old because nobody else will. What's insane is Tommy nearly drowning because the adults in his life didn't protect him. Christopher's voice softened. Please, Vicky, let me help. Let me finally do what I should have done 20 years ago. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, staring at their joined hands. Finally, she looked up, and in her eyes, Christopher saw something he hadn't seen since that hospital room. Hope. Okay, she whispered. Okay, but Chris, what about Kevin? He won't just let us go. Christopher's expression hardened. Leave Kevin Barnes to me, and Whitmore too. They've had their way for 20 years. It's time someone reminded them that every action has consequences. They talked for another hour, making plans. Christopher would have the townhouse prepared immediately. Victoria would tell Barnes she was leaving, preferably in a public place with witnesses. Christopher would make sure his lawyer drew up restraining orders if needed. And they would, together, figure out how to build a safe life for 2 children who deserved so much better than what they'd been given. As they finally stood to leave, Victoria hesitated. Chris, I know we can't just pick up where we left off. Too much has happened. I'm not the girl you fell in love with anymore. No, Christopher agreed. You're stronger. You're a mother. You're a survivor. And Vicky, He smiled, really smiled, for the first time since Saturday's crisis. I think I'm falling in love with who you are now just as much as I loved who you were then. She kissed his cheek, brief and sweet and filled with promise. Thank you for not giving up on us. Never, Christopher said. Not in 20 years, not now, not ever. As Victoria left the diner to pick up her children from the neighbor who watched them after preschool, Christopher sat back down in the booth and pulled out his phone. He had calls to make, legal teams to mobilize, a property to prepare, and a reckoning to plan for James Whitmore and Kevin Barnes. Because Christopher Ashford hadn't built a billion-dollar empire by letting people push him around. He'd done it by being ruthlessly efficient when protecting what mattered to him. And now, finally, he knew exactly what mattered most. A second chance at love. 2 children who needed safety. And justice long overdue, for a woman who'd sacrificed everything to protect him. The game had changed. And this time, Christopher was playing to win. The following Thursday evening, Victoria stood in the living room of the Fremont townhouse, watching Macy spin in circles with her arms outstretched. The 5-year-old's laughter echoed off walls that actually had fresh paint, in a space where the carpet wasn't stained and the windows actually locked properly. Tommy toddled after his sister, giggling as only a 2-year-old could, completely unaware of the magnitude of what had just happened. They had their own home, a real home. Mommy, look. Macy grabbed Victoria's hand and dragged her toward the stairs. I have my own room, with a real bed and everything, and there's a nightlight that looks like stars, and the closet is so big I can hide in it and... Breathe, baby. Victoria laughed, her first genuine laugh in months, maybe years. I see it. It's beautiful. Can we really stay here forever? Macy's excitement dimmed slightly, replaced by the cautious hope of a child who'd learned not to count on good things lasting. Kevin won't make us leave. Victoria knelt down to her daughter's level, taking both small hands in hers. Kevin doesn't live here, sweetheart. This is our home, just us. You, me, and Tommy. Nobody's going to make us leave. What about Mr. Chris? Will he come visit? I think so, yes. Good. Macy's face brightened again. I like him. He's nice. Not like... She stopped herself, but Victoria knew what she'd been about to say. Not like Kevin. The past 3 days had been a whirlwind. Victoria had followed Christopher's advice and told Kevin she was leaving, doing it at the diner during her shift with her manager and 2 co-workers present. Kevin's reaction had been exactly as explosive as she'd feared. Shouting, accusations, threats. But when he'd tried to grab her arm, her manager had stepped between them and told Kevin to leave or she'd call the police. The real shock had come later that evening when 2 police officers showed up at the apartment with a restraining order. Kevin was not to come within 500 feet of Victoria or her children. The order had been expedited through the courts with unusual speed. Christopher's influence, Victoria suspected, and was backed by documentation of Kevin's assault record and gambling debts. Kevin had packed his belongings in a rage, shouting threats through the door that Victoria had wisely kept locked. This isn't over, Vicky. You think your rich boyfriend can just swoop in and take what's mine? I know people. Whitmore won't let this stand. That name, Whitmore, had sent chills down Victoria's spine. But then Christopher's security team had arrived, 2 professional men who'd stood guard while Kevin loaded his truck and drove away. They'd stayed until Victoria and the children were safely packed and moved to the townhouse. Now, standing in this beautiful space that felt like a dream, Victoria pulled out her phone and texted Christopher. We're moved in. The kids love it. I don't know how to thank you. His response came quickly. No thanks necessary. How are you really doing? She thought about lying, about saying everything was fine. But Christopher had always been able to see through her pretenses. Scared, relieved, grateful, terrified Kevin will find a way to hurt us. Amazed this is real. All of it at once. The security team will do regular drive-bys. The restraining order is solid. And Vicky? I meant what I said. You're not alone anymore. Victoria's throat tightened with emotion. Before she could respond, her phone rang. An unknown number. Her stomach dropped. She almost didn't answer, but something made her press accept. Ms. Phillips? An unfamiliar male voice, smooth and cultured, This is James Whitmore. I believe we need to have a conversation. Victoria's blood ran cold. She hadn't heard that voice in 20 years, but she recognized it instantly. I have nothing to say to you. I think you do. You see, I've recently learned that you've been reconnecting with an old friend. Christopher Ashford. That's unfortunate. What I do is none of your business. Oh, but it is my business. Whitmore's voice took on a harder edge. 20 years ago, you and I had an agreement. You left Seattle, left Christopher alone, and in exchange, I let you disappear quietly. But now you're back in his life, and that creates problems for me. You paid Kevin to control me, Victoria said, anger overriding her fear. You've been manipulating my life for 2 decades. I've been ensuring that certain unfortunate truths stay buried, Ms. Phillips. Truths that would be very damaging to me if they came to light. Christopher is a vindictive man when he feels wronged. If he learns the full extent of what happened 20 years ago. Whitmore paused. Let's just say it would be better for everyone if you reconsidered this reunion. Are you threatening me? I'm offering you a choice. I'll triple the monthly amount I was paying Barnes if you take your children and leave Seattle. Go somewhere far away. Start fresh, or, he let the word hang, or I'll make sure everyone knows why you really left Christopher. I'll make sure he knows about the pregnancy. Victoria's world tilted. What? Oh, you thought I didn't know? Whitmore's laugh was cold. I make it my business to know everything, Ms. Phillips. You found out you were pregnant 2 weeks before you left. You lost the baby 3 months later. You never told Christopher about either event. That's a secret that could poison your little reunion quite effectively, don't you think? Tears streamed down Victoria's face. You're a monster. I'm a businessman protecting my interests. You have 48 hours to decide. Leave Seattle or I tell Christopher everything, including the fact that you were carrying his child when you abandoned him. The line went dead. Victoria stood frozen, the phone shaking in her hand. The pregnancy. God, she'd tried so hard to forget about those awful months. She discovered she was pregnant during the week Whitmore delivered his ultimatum. The stress, the heartbreak, the impossible decision she'd had to make. It had all been too much. She'd lost the baby at 12 weeks, alone in a Tacoma apartment, with no one to hold her while she grieved for everything she'd lost. She'd never told anyone. Not her parents, not her friends, and certainly not Christopher. What would have been the point? The baby was gone. Christopher was gone. Telling him would only have made everything more painful. But now Whitmore was threatening to weaponize her deepest pain, to use it to drive a wedge between her and Christopher just when they'd found their way back to each other. Mommy. Macy appeared in the doorway, her face concerned. Why are you crying? Victoria quickly wiped her eyes. Just happy tears, baby. This is such a nice house. Can we have pizza for dinner? Mr. Chris left money for food. Yes, sweetie, pizza sounds perfect. Victoria forced a smile. As Macy ran off to tell Tommy about dinner plans, Victoria sank onto the new couch and buried her face in her hands. She had to tell Christopher. Had to tell him everything before Whitmore did. But how could she explain that she'd been pregnant with his child and never told him? How could she make him understand that she'd been trying to protect him even then? Her phone buzzed with a text from Christopher. Everything okay? You stopped responding. Victoria stared at the message for a long moment. Then she typed, Can you come over, tonight? I need to tell you something important. On my way. Christopher arrived 45 minutes later, carrying 2 large pizzas and a bag of toys for the kids. Macy launched herself at him with a squeal of delight, and even shy Tommy toddled over for attention. Christopher scooped them both up, laughing as they chattered about their new rooms and the backyard with the swing set. Watching him with her children, Victoria felt her heart crack open. This man, this good, kind, generous man, had been robbed of so much, and she'd been part of that robbery, even if she'd thought she was doing the right thing. After dinner, after the kids were settled in front of a movie in the living room with a baby monitor so Victoria could hear if they needed anything, she and Christopher stepped onto the back patio. The evening air was cool and Seattle's city lights twinkled in the distance. You said you needed to tell me something, Christopher prompted gently. Victoria gripped the patio railing. Whitmore called me today. Christopher's entire body went rigid. What did he say? He threatened me. Told me I had 48 hours to leave Seattle or he'd tell you something. Something I should have told you 20 years ago. Victoria's voice broke. Chris, I was pregnant when I left you. The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria couldn't bring herself to look at Christopher's face, couldn't bear to see what she knew would be there. Betrayal, hurt, anger. Pregnant, Christopher finally repeated, his voice eerily flat. With my child. Yes, I found out the same week Whitmore gave me his ultimatum. I was going to tell you, I swear I was. But then everything happened so fast and I thought. Victoria's hands shook. I thought if you knew, you'd throw away your future to be with me. You'd fight Whitmore and ruin your life, and I couldn't let that happen. So I left. And the baby? I lost it. 12 weeks later. I was alone in Tacoma and I started bleeding and I went to the hospital and they told me it was a miscarriage and She couldn't continue. The sobs she'd been holding back for 20 years broke free, shaking her entire body. Christopher's hands were suddenly on her shoulders, turning her to face him, who... His face was pale, his eyes bright with unshed tears, but there was no anger there. Only grief. Vicky. Oh God, Vicky. I'm sorry. She sobbed. I'm so sorry. You should have known. You had a right to know. But I was 19 and terrified, and I thought I was protecting you, and I made all the wrong choices, and... Christopher pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. You were alone. You went through that alone. Jesus, Vicky, you should never have been alone. I thought it was for the best. It wasn't. None of it was. Christopher's voice was rough with emotion. But I understand why you did it. I hate it, but I understand it. You were backed into a corner by a powerful man who used your love for me as a weapon. That's on Whitmore, not you. Victoria pulled back to look at him through her tears. You're not angry? I'm furious, but not at you. Christopher's jaw clenched. I'm angry at Whitmore for putting you in that position. I'm angry at myself for not seeing what was happening. I'm angry at a world where a 19-year-old girl had to make impossible choices alone. But you? No, Vicky. I'm not angry at you. He's using it as leverage. He said if I don't leave Seattle, he'll tell you everything, including the pregnancy, to poison our reunion. He's too late. You just told me yourself. Christopher wiped the tears from her cheeks with his thumbs. And it hasn't changed anything. If anything, it makes me more determined to make sure he pays for what he did to us. To you. Chris, he's dangerous. He has power and money, and so do I. And unlike Whitmore, I use mine to protect people I care about, not manipulate them. Christopher's voice was steel wrapped in silk. Whitmore made a mistake 20 years ago when he decided to play God with our lives. He's made an even bigger mistake by continuing to do so. It ends now. What are you going to do? I'm going to destroy him. Christopher said it simply, as if discussing the weather. Not physically, not illegally, but I'm going to dismantle everything he's built using the same tools he used against us. Information, influence, and strategic pressure. And when I'm done, he'll wish he'd left us alone. Victoria should have been frightened by the cold determination in Christopher's voice. Instead, she felt something shift inside her, the tight knot of fear and guilt that she'd carried for 2 decades beginning to loosen. She wasn't alone anymore. She didn't have to fight her battles by herself. The question is, Christopher continued, are you with me? This won't be easy. Whitmore will fight back. It might get ugly before it gets better. But if we stand together, if we refuse to let him intimidate us anymore, we can win. Victoria thought about Macy and Tommy, playing safely in their new home. She thought about the pregnancy she'd lost, the grief she'd carried alone. She thought about 20 years of struggling and suffering while Whitmore pulled strings from the shadows. I'm with you, she said firmly. Whatever it takes. Christopher smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him since this conversation began. Then let's show James Whitmore what happens when he underestimates 2 people who refuse to stay broken. They talked for another hour, making plans. Christopher had already had his legal team investigating Whitmore's business dealings. What they'd found was damning: tax evasion, fraudulent property deals, bribery of city officials. Enough to bury Whitmore if presented to the right authorities. "But I want to give him a chance first," Christopher said. "A chance to back off voluntarily. If he agrees to leave you alone, releases any leverage he has over Kevin Barnes, and provides financial compensation for 20 years of manipulation, I'll keep his crimes quiet. If he refuses." Christopher's expression hardened. "Then I'll make sure every prosecutor in Washington state gets a copy of my findings." "That's more mercy than he deserves." "Maybe. But I'm not doing this for him. I'm doing it for us. I want to move forward, Vicky. I want to build a life with you and your children. I don't want to spend the next year tied up in legal battles against Whitmore if I can avoid it. So I'll offer him an out, but only one." As Christopher prepared to leave, he paused at the door. "Vicky, the baby we lost. Did you know if it was a boy or a girl?" "Too early to tell." Victoria's voice was soft. "But I used to imagine it was a girl, with your eyes and my stubborn streak." Christopher closed his eyes briefly, grief passing over his features. "I wish I could have been there. I wish I could have held you and grieved with you." "So do I. But Chris? I think maybe." Victoria gestured toward the living room where Macy and Tommy were watching their movie. "Maybe we get a second chance now, not to replace what we lost, but to build something new, with 2 kids who need us. They're not my biological children." "No, but they called you for help when they were drowning. That has to mean something." Christopher pulled Victoria close one more time, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "It means everything. Get some rest. Tomorrow I'm meeting with Whitmore. And Vicky, no matter what he says or does, remember, he has no power over us anymore. We took that away the moment you told me the truth." After Christopher left, Victoria checked on her children. Both were asleep. Macy sprawled across her new bed with a stuffed bear clutched in her arms. Tommy curled up in his crib with his favorite blanket. They looked peaceful, safe, content in a way they never had before. Victoria's phone buzzed. A text from Christopher. "Sleep well. Everything's going to be okay now, I promise." For the first time in 20 years, Victoria actually believed it. The meeting with James Whitmore took place at a neutral location, a private room at the Columbia Club, one of Seattle's most prestigious establishments. Christopher arrived with Marcus and his lead attorney, Daniel Brennan. Whitmore came alone, which was either arrogance or stupidity, possibly both. "Christopher," Whitmore greeted him with a politician's smile, extending his hand. "It's been too long." Christopher ignored the hand. "Let's skip the pleasantries, James. We both know why we're here." Whitmore's smile didn't falter, but his eyes went cold. "Always direct. I remember that about you. Even at 22, you had the same blunt approach. It served you well in business, I suppose." "It served me better than blackmail, and manipulation served you." Christopher took a seat at the conference table. "Here's the situation. You have 48 hours to make this right. After that, I go public with everything I know about your business practices." "Is that a threat?" "It's a fact." Daniel Brennan slid a folder across the table. "Inside, you'll find documentation of 14 separate instances of fraud, tax evasion, and bribery spanning the last 20 years. We have bank statements, emails, testimony from 3 whistleblowers willing to go on record. The U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Washington would be very interested in this information." Whitmore opened the folder, his face carefully neutral as he scanned the contents. But Christopher saw his hand tighten on the pages. "Where did you get this?" "I make it my business to know things, James. Just like you claimed to do 20 years ago when you destroyed Victoria's life." Christopher leaned forward. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to sign a document stating that you coerced Victoria Summers into leaving Seattle under false pretenses. You're going to provide financial compensation, $5 million for 20 years of suffering, and you're going to publicly apologize for your actions." "That's insane. I'll do no such thing." "Then you'll go to prison. Your choice." Christopher's voice was ice. "Oh, and one more thing. Kevin Barnes. You're going to cut all contact with him, stop all payments, and make it clear that if he ever approaches Victoria or her children again, you'll cooperate fully with any prosecution against him. Whitmore's facade finally cracked. You arrogant son of a bitch. You think you can waltz in here and make demands? I have power in this city. Connections. Friends in high places. So do I. The difference is my friends actually like me because I haven't spent decades blackmailing and manipulating them. Christopher stood. You have 48 hours, James. After that, this folder goes to the authorities, the media, and every business associate you have. Your reputation will be destroyed. Your businesses will collapse. And you'll spend the rest of your life watching everything you built crumble. This is about a college girl, Whitmore exploded, standing as well. A nobody from nowhere who wasn't right for you anyway. I did you a favor, Christopher. I saved you from a future of mediocrity. The room went silent. Marcus took a step forward, but Christopher held up a hand. You want to know what Victoria was? Christopher's voice was deadly quiet. She was brilliant. She was kind. She was working 3 jobs to put herself through school because she came from nothing and was determined to make something of herself. She was the best thing that ever happened to me. And you destroyed her because your spoiled daughter wanted what she couldn't have. You didn't do me a favor, James. You robbed me of 20 years with the woman I loved. You forced her to lose our child alone. You trapped her in poverty and desperation while I built an empire she should have been part of building. Whitmore's face had gone ashen. Child? What child? The baby Victoria was carrying when she left. The baby she lost 3 months later, alone and terrified because you'd convinced her that telling me would ruin my life. Christopher's hands clenched into fists. So no, James. You didn't do me any favors. You committed one of the cruelest acts I've ever witnessed. And now you're going to pay for it. I didn't know about a pregnancy, Whitmore said, and for the first time he sounded shaken. I swear I didn't know. Does it matter? Your actions caused it anyway. Christopher headed toward the door. 48 hours. The document will be delivered to your office tomorrow. Sign it, transfer the money, and this ends quietly. Refuse, and I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man you are. Wait. Whitmore's voice stopped Christopher at the door. What about my daughter, Caroline? She has a family now, grandchildren. This will destroy her too. Then maybe you should have thought about that 20 years ago before you decided to play God with people's lives. Christopher looked back, his expression merciless. But for what it's worth, the public statement won't mention Caroline specifically. This is between you and me. Your daughter's reputation will survive. Whether yours does is up to you. Marcus and Daniel followed Christopher out of the room. Once they were safely in the car, Marcus let out a low whistle. That was intense. Think he'll sign? He'll sign, Christopher said with certainty. He's a coward and a bully. Once he realizes I'm serious about destroying him, he'll do whatever it takes to protect himself. And if he doesn't, then we follow through. Every word was true. We have enough evidence to put him away for years, but honestly, Christopher stared out the window at the Seattle skyline. I hope he signs. Not for his sake, but for Vicky's. She's been through enough. I want this chapter closed so we can move forward. Daniel Brennan flipped through his notes. What about Kevin Barnes? Whitmore cutting him off will make him desperate. Desperate men do dangerous things. Already handled. Christopher pulled out his phone and showed them a series of photos. While we were meeting with Whitmore, my security team was delivering a message to Barnes. Those are pictures of every illegal gambling operation he's involved with, every debt he owes, and every law he's broken. Along with a simple proposition. Leave Seattle voluntarily and we'll clear his debts and give him $20,000 to start over somewhere else. Refuse, and we hand everything over to the police. Marcus grinned. You really did think of everything. I learned from the best. Christopher thought of Victoria's strength, her resilience, the way she'd survived 2 decades of manipulation and hardship. From someone who taught me that sometimes protecting the people you love means playing chess while everyone else is playing checkers. His phone rang. Victoria's number. Hey, everything okay? Chris, Kevin just showed up at the house. Victoria's voice was tense but controlled. He's outside shouting. He says he knows you're trying to buy him off and he's not going anywhere. The kids are scared. Christopher's blood ran cold. Lock all the doors and windows. Call 911 right now. We're 10 minutes away. Already done. The police are on their way. I needed to hear your voice. I'm coming, Vicky, I'm coming right now. Christopher nodded at Marcus, who immediately instructed the driver to head toward the Fremont townhouse. Stay away from the windows, keep the kids in an interior room. Do you have the panic button I gave you? Yes. Chris, he's saying horrible things about me, about you, about what he's going to do when he gets his hands on us. He's not getting his hands on anyone. The restraining order is in effect. Just by being there, he's violating it and will be arrested. Christopher heard sirens in the background through the phone. Are those police sirens? Yes. They're pulling up now. Kevin's running. He's running toward his truck. Let him run. The police will catch him. Vicky, I'm 6 minutes away. Just breathe. You're safe. The kids are safe. Thank you, Victoria whispered. Thank you for always coming when we need you. By the time Christopher arrived, Kevin was in handcuffs in the back of a police car, still shouting threats. Christopher spoke briefly with the officers, providing additional documentation of Barnes's harassment and threats. The police sergeant was sympathetic and thorough. We'll be holding him for violating the restraining order, the sergeant explained. With his record and these new threats, the judge will likely deny bail. Ms. Phillips and the children will be safe. Inside the townhouse, Christopher found Victoria in the living room, holding both children. Macy was crying quietly, and Tommy was too young to understand what had happened but was upset because his sister was upset. They looked up when Christopher entered, and Macy immediately reached for him. Mr. Chris. Kevin was so scary and he was yelling and saying bad words and, I know, sweetheart, I know. Christopher gathered all three of them into his arms. But he's gone now. The police have him and he's not coming back. Promise? Macy's voice was tiny. I promise. He broke the law by coming here. The police will make sure he stays far away from you and your mommy and Tommy. They stayed like that for several minutes, just holding each other. Eventually, Tommy fell asleep against Christopher's shoulder. Macy's tears subsided into hiccups, and Victoria. Victoria looked at Christopher with something in her eyes that made his heart skip. You really are our hero, she said softly. 3 times now you've saved us. 3 times? The forest, moving us here, today. 3 times you've been exactly where we needed you to be. Christopher shifted Tommy to one arm and used his free hand to cup Victoria's face. I'll be here as many times as you need me. 1,000 times if necessary, that's what... He stopped himself. That's what? Victoria prompted. That's what people do when they love each other. Christopher said it simply, honestly. I still love you, Vicky. I think I always will. And I'm falling in love with these kids too, if I'm being completely honest. So yeah, I'll be here. Every single time. Victoria's eyes filled with tears, but they were happy tears this time. I love you too. I never stopped. Even when I thought I should, even when I tried to, I couldn't. You were always the one. They kissed, soft and sweet and 20 years in the making. Macy made a face and said, "You," which made them both laugh. The sound of their laughter woke Tommy, who looked around in confusion before deciding everything was fine and going back to sleep. Later, after the kids were in bed, after Victoria had given her statement to the police, after all the logistics were handled, she and Christopher sat together on the back patio again. The stars were bright despite the city lights, and the night air carried the scent of jasmine from a neighbor's garden. Whitmore will sign the agreement, Christopher said. I'm certain of it. And Kevin will take the buyout and leave Seattle. He's a coward at heart. The first sign of real consequences and he'll run. What happens to us then? Victoria asked. After all this is over? Whatever we want to happen. Christopher pulled her closer. We could take things slow, date properly, like we should have done 20 years ago, or... He paused. Or we could acknowledge that we've already wasted 2 decades and we don't want to waste any more time. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that I buy a bigger house. One with enough bedrooms for kids to have their own spaces and maybe a home office where you could finish your degree if you wanted. I'm suggesting we build a life together. Not rushing, but not pretending we're strangers either. I'm suggesting I get to be there for Macy's first day of kindergarten and Tommy's terrible twos and all the moments I've already missed. Victoria was quiet, and Christopher worried he'd pushed too far, too fast. Then she said, "I'd like that. All of it. But Chris, you need to understand. They're my kids, not yours. You don't have to take on the responsibility of raising them." "I don't have to," Christopher agreed. "I want to. There's a difference. Macy called me thinking I was her daddy. Maybe that was fate's way of telling us I'm supposed to be. Not to replace whoever their biological fathers were, but to be the father they actually need." "They need you," Victoria said simply. "I need you. So yes. Let's build this life together. Let's be the family we were always meant to be." They sealed it with another kiss, longer this time, full of promise and possibility. In the house behind them, 2 children slept peacefully, safe and loved. And somewhere across the city, James Whitmore stared at the documents that would end his manipulation, and Kevin Barnes sat in a jail cell contemplating his choices. The pieces were falling into place. Justice was being served. And after 20 years of separation and suffering, Christopher and Victoria were finally finding their way back to each other. 6 months later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of a spacious Tudor-style house in the Madison Park neighborhood. Christopher stood in the kitchen making pancakes while Tommy sat in a high chair, making an enthusiastic mess with his breakfast. Macy was at the table working carefully on her homework. First grade had proven to be everything she'd hoped for and more. "Mr. Chris, can you help me with this math problem?" Macy held up her worksheet. "I don't understand what they mean by carry the one." Christopher smiled, wiping his hands on a towel and moving to look over her shoulder. "Let me show you a trick my mom taught me when I was your age." Victoria appeared in the doorway, fresh from a shower, her hair still damp. She wore jeans and a comfortable sweater, the outfit of someone who no longer had to rush between 2 jobs, who could actually take time to breathe. She'd been taking online classes at night, working toward finishing her degree. Christopher had offered to pay for in-person classes, but Victoria insisted she needed to earn this herself. They'd compromised on him paying for everything else so she could focus on school. "Morning," she said, accepting the coffee Christopher handed her. "What's the domestic disaster level today?" "Tommy has oatmeal in his hair. Macy just mastered addition with carrying numbers, and I may have made enough pancakes to feed a small army." Christopher kissed her cheek. "So, pretty normal." Normal. That word meant something different now than it had 6 months ago. Normal was Sunday morning breakfasts and homework help and the comfortable chaos of a family. It was having someone to come home to, someone who understood when work got stressful, someone who knew how you took your coffee and could tell when you'd had a bad day just by looking at you. It was everything Christopher had dreamed of at 19 and thought he'd lost forever. "Mommy, guess what?" Macy bounced in her seat. "My teacher said I might get to skip to 2nd grade math next year because I'm so good at it." "That's amazing, baby." Victoria hugged her daughter. "You've been working so hard." "Mr. Chris helps me. He's really smart." Macy looked up at Christopher with complete trust. "He's the smartest person I know." Christopher felt his throat tighten with emotion. These small moments, the offhand compliments, the casual affection, meant more to him than closing any business deal ever had. "Well, you're pretty smart yourself, kiddo. I'm just helping you figure out what you already know." Tommy chose that moment to throw his bowl of oatmeal on the floor, shouting "Done," with great enthusiasm. Christopher and Victoria looked at each other and burst out laughing. This was their life now, messy, chaotic, absolutely perfect. After breakfast, after Macy was off to school on the bus, after Tommy was settled with his toys in the playroom, Victoria and Christopher finally had a moment alone. They sat in the living room with their second cups of coffee, comfortable silence stretching between them. "I got an email from Daniel this morning," Christopher said. "The settlement with Whitmore is finalized. The last transfer went through yesterday. $5 million. It had seemed like an absurd amount when Christopher first demanded it, but Daniel had argued it was barely adequate compensation for 20 years of manipulation and suffering. Whitmore had fought the figure at first, but when faced with the alternative, criminal prosecution and public exposure, he'd eventually capitulated. The money was in a trust fund, split 3 ways. 1/3 for Victoria's education and personal use, 1/3 for Macy's future, and 1/3 for Tommy's future. Christopher had insisted on the division, knowing Victoria would try to refuse the money if it was just for her. "I still can't believe it's real," Victoria said softly. $5 million. For years I struggled to pay rent, and now you never have to struggle again." Christopher took her hand. "None of you do. That's the point. What about Whitmore? What happened to him?" "He resigned from all his boards, sold his company to a rival firm, and moved to Arizona. Last I heard, he's working as a consultant and keeping a very low profile. His daughter cut contact with him when she found out what he'd done. Apparently she was horrified. Good. He deserved to lose something important to him like he made me lose you. He didn't make you lose me. He delayed us. There's a difference." Christopher pulled Victoria closer. "We found our way back. That's what matters." "And Kevin?" "Took the money and the clean slate. Last known location was Nevada. My sources say he's working construction and staying clean. Well, cleaner. He still gambles, but nothing like before. Fear of consequences is a powerful motivator." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "Do you ever wonder how different our lives would have been if Whitmore hadn't interfered?" "Every day," Christopher admitted. "We'd have graduated together, probably gotten married young, built our careers side by side. Macy and Tommy would have been ours from the beginning." He paused. "But you know what? I think maybe we needed those 20 years. Not the suffering. I'd take all of that away from you in a heartbeat if I could. But the growing. The becoming who we are now. I was an arrogant rich kid at 22. I needed to build something, to prove I could make it on my own merit. You needed to develop the strength you have now, even though it came at a terrible price." "That's a very philosophical way of looking at trauma," Victoria said wryly. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just trying to find meaning in senseless pain." Christopher kissed her forehead. "The point is, we're here now. Together. With 2 incredible kids who need us. I'll take that over any alternate timeline. Even though they're not yours biologically." "Vicky, I've been meaning to talk to you about that." Christopher set down his coffee and turned to face her fully. "I know we've been taking things slow with the kids, not pushing the dad issue, letting them call me Mr. Chris, keeping things comfortable. But the truth is, I love them. I love Macy's curiosity and her protective instinct toward Tommy. I love Tommy's laughter and the way he lights up when he sees me. I want to be their father, not just in practice, but officially." Victoria's eyes widened. "You want to adopt them?" "If you'll let me, if they want that. I know it's a big step, and I know they have biological fathers out there somewhere who might have opinions." "Their biological fathers signed away parental rights years ago," Victoria interrupted. "Neither of them wanted anything to do with the kids. So legally there's nothing standing in the way except—" She paused. "Except you and me." "What are we, Chris? We live together. We're raising kids together, but we've never really defined what this is." Christopher stood and walked to the mantel, pulling out a small velvet box he'd hidden there a week ago. He'd been waiting for the right moment, and apparently, this was it. "I've been carrying this around for weeks," he said, turning back to Victoria. "Waiting for some perfect romantic moment. A candlelit dinner or a sunset or something. But you know what? Our life isn't about perfect moments. It's about Tommy throwing oatmeal and Macy needing help with math and figuring out how to build a family from broken pieces." He opened the box, revealing a simple but elegant diamond ring. Victoria's hand flew to her mouth. "Victoria Phillips, you've been the love of my life since I was 19 years old. I lost you once, and I'll be damned if I lose you again. I want to wake up every morning and make you coffee. I want to help Macy with her homework and teach Tommy how to ride a bike. I want to grow old with you and watch our kids, yes, our kids, grow up and build their own lives. So please marry me. Let me be your husband and their father. Let me spend the rest of my life proving that fairy tales can come true, even if they take 20 years and a wrong number phone call to happen." Victoria was crying, laughing, nodding all at once. "Yes. God, yes. 1,000 times yes." Christopher slipped the ring onto her finger and they kissed like teenagers again, full of promise and passion and the certainty that this time, nothing would separate them. When they finally broke apart, Victoria was grinning through her tears. So, should we tell the kids? Or wait for a special moment? Let's tell them now. Right now. I've waited 20 years for this family. I don't want to wait another minute to make it official. They found Tommy in the playroom, building an elaborate tower of blocks that defied physics. He looked up when they entered and immediately toddled over, arms raised to be picked up. Christopher scooped him up and Tommy patted his face affectionately, saying, "Dada clear as day." Christopher froze. Victoria gasped. Tommy, oblivious to the magnitude of what he'd just said, repeated it. "Dada, dada, down." Did he just... Christopher couldn't finish the sentence. "He did," Victoria whispered. "He's been calling you that to himself for weeks. I've heard him. I was waiting to see if he'd say it to you directly." Christopher held Tommy closer, pressing a kiss to the toddler's messy hair. "Hey, buddy. Yeah, Dada's got you. Dada's always got you." When they picked Macy up from school that afternoon, they took her to her favorite ice cream shop. Over sundaes with too many toppings, Victoria broke the news. "Macy, sweetie, Mr. Chris and I want to talk to you about something important." Macy's eyes went wide. "Are we in trouble?" "No, baby, no. The opposite, actually." Victoria glanced at Christopher, who nodded encouragement. "Mr. Chris and I are going to get married. We're going to be a family officially. Married like princesses in movies?" Macy's face lit up. "Does that mean I get to wear a fancy dress?" Christopher laughed. "Yes, you can absolutely wear a fancy dress, but there's something else. After we get married, I'd like to officially become your dad. That means I'd adopt you and Tommy. You'd be Macy Ashford instead of Macy Phillips, but only if you want that. This is your choice, sweetheart." Macy was quiet for a moment, her expression serious as she processed this information. Finally, she looked up at Christopher with those huge blue eyes that had trusted him from the very beginning. "Will you teach me things? Like you teach me math? I'll teach you everything I can. And will you come to my school stuff? Like parent day and plays and things? I'll be at every single one. Front row, probably embarrassing you by cheering too loud. And you won't leave? Even if you get mad or if we're bad?" Christopher's heart broke at the question. This was the real fear, he realized. Not whether he'd be a good father, but whether he'd be a permanent one. These kids had been abandoned before in small and large ways. They needed to know this time was different. He knelt down to Macy's eye level, taking her small hands in his larger ones. "Macy, listen to me carefully. I will never leave you. Never. Not when I'm mad. Not when things get hard. Not ever. You're stuck with me for life, kiddo, and you know why? Why? Because the day you called me in that forest, you didn't just call a wrong number. You called the right number. The number that was always supposed to be there for you. Some people might say it was a mistake or an accident, but I think it was meant to be. You and Tommy and your mom, you're my family, and I protect my family. Always." Macy threw her arms around Christopher's neck, nearly knocking him over. "Okay, then yes, I want you to be my real dad." "I already am your real dad, sweetheart. The paperwork is just making it official." That evening, Christopher made phone calls to his lawyer to start the adoption process. Victoria called her parents in Portland, who cried tears of joy at the news that their daughter had finally found happiness after so many hard years. Macy drew pictures of their new family and hung them on the refrigerator. Tommy went to bed early, exhausted from an exciting day, still occasionally murmuring "Dada" in his sleep. And Christopher sat on the back patio once again, looking up at the stars, marveling at how completely his life had changed in 6 short months. He'd gone from a lonely billionaire living in an empty penthouse to a father of 2, preparing to marry the love of his life. All because a scared 5-year-old girl had dialed a wrong number and thought he was her daddy. No, Christopher corrected himself. Not a wrong number. The right number. It had always been the right number. His phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Saw the engagement announcement in the paper. Congratulations, you lucky bastard. Never thought I'd see you this happy." Christopher smiled and typed back. "Neither did I. But here we are. You deserve this, Chris. After everything, you deserve this." Maybe he did. Or maybe nobody deserved happiness. Maybe you just had to be brave enough to grab it when it appeared, to race into a storm to save two children you'd never met, to stand up to powerful men who'd manipulated you, to open your heart even when it had been broken before. Victoria joined him on the patio, wrapping her arms around him from behind. The kids are asleep. Tommy's clutching that stuffed bear you bought him, and Macy's practicing writing Macy Ashford in her notebook. She's excited about the name change? She's already planning how she'll introduce you on the first day of school next year. Apparently, it's very important that everyone knows she has the coolest dad ever. Victoria kissed his cheek. Her words, not mine. Though you agree with the sentiment, I hope. Absolutely. Coolest husband-to-be ever. How's that? They stood together watching the city lights, comfortable in the silence. After a while, Victoria said quietly, "Do you really think it was fate? The phone number? I think fate is just another word for the universe paying attention to what we need, even when we don't know we need it." Macy needed someone to answer that call. You needed to reconnect with me. I needed to find purpose beyond building companies and making money. And somehow, improbably, a disconnected phone number that should have led nowhere led us all to exactly where we were meant to be. That's beautiful. And completely unlike the practical businessman I fell in love with at 19. That businessman grew up, learned that the most important things in life can't be quantified on a balance sheet. Christopher turned to face Victoria, taking both her hands. I've closed billion-dollar deals and built companies from nothing. But standing in that forest watching Macy smile at me through her tears and say, "You came," that's the moment I'll remember on my deathbed. Not the business victories. This. You. Them. Us. I love you, Victoria said simply. I loved you at 19. I loved you through 20 years apart, and I'll love you for all the years we have left. Good. Because I'm planning on that being a very long time. They went inside, checking on the kids one more time before heading to bed. In her room, Macy was indeed still clutching her notebook with Macy Ashford, written in careful first-grade handwriting. Tommy had somehow ended up perpendicular across his crib, the stuffed bear balanced on his head. Christopher carefully adjusted Tommy back to a normal sleeping position, covering him with his blanket. The little boy stirred, murmuring "da-da" again before settling back into sleep. Each time he heard it, Christopher felt the same surge of overwhelming love and protectiveness. In Macy's room, Victoria gently took the notebook from her daughter's hands and set it on the nightstand. Macy blinked awake briefly. "Mommy? Is Mr. Chris really going to be my daddy?" "Yes, baby. Really and truly." "Good. I knew he was supposed to be. That's why I called him that day in the forest. I knew he'd come." Macy's eyes drifted closed again. "Love you, Mommy. Love you, Daddy." It was the first time she'd called him that directly while awake. Christopher had to step into the hallway to compose himself, overwhelmed by the simple perfection of hearing that word directed at him. Victoria found him there, tears streaming down his face. She didn't say anything, just held him while he cried, for the baby they'd lost 20 years ago, for the years of pain and separation, for the sheer miraculous joy of this second chance they'd been given. "We're going to be okay," Victoria whispered. "All of us. We're going to be more than okay." "I know." Christopher pulled back, wiping his eyes. "Because we're together, and together we can handle anything." That night, lying in bed with Victoria asleep beside him, Christopher pulled out his phone one last time. He opened his contacts and stared at the entry that had started everything. Home. It was still programmed with the same number that Macy had dialed 6 months ago, the number that should never have reached him but somehow did. He edited the contact, changing the name from home to the call that changed everything. Because that's what it was, a wrong number that had been impossibly, miraculously right. A desperate cry for help that had led to salvation for 4 lost souls. A moment of connection that had bridged 20 years of separation and suffering. Christopher had spent his adult life making calculated decisions, weighing risks and rewards, building empires through careful planning. But the best thing that ever happened to him had come through pure chance. A little girl's panic, a recycled phone number, and a split-second decision to answer a call from an unknown number. He would never not answer unknown calls again. In the morning, there would be wedding planning and adoption paperwork and the million small details of merging lives and building a family. There would be challenges ahead, helping the kids process their past trauma, navigating the complexities of blended family dynamics, balancing careers and parenting and everything else life would throw at them. But right now, in this perfect moment, Christopher was simply grateful. Grateful for second chances and wrong numbers that led to right places. Grateful for 2 children who taught him what really mattered. Grateful for a woman who'd loved him enough to sacrifice everything, and who'd loved him enough to try again when fate gave them another shot. Outside, Seattle slept. Inside this house, a new family dreamed of their future together. And somewhere in the universe, fate smiled at a job well done, taking 4 broken pieces and fitting them together into something whole and beautiful and absolutely right. The wrong number had saved everything. But perhaps, Christopher thought as he finally drifted off to sleep, it had never been wrong at all. Some calls are simply meant to be answered.